Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a situation that really highlights how even the best policy intentions can sometimes lead to some unexpected and, frankly, pretty challenging outcomes. We're focusing on the watercolors community in La Quinta, California, trying to unpack the complex world of affordable housing agreements. Our mission really is to understand how these agreements, designed for good, can over time become these huge hurdles, impacting finances, community infrastructure, even people's lives. Just imagine owning a home, right? A place you put your savings into, under an agreement that seemed fine years ago. But now, maybe almost 2 decades later, that same agreement is making it tough to maintain your property or sell, or even plan for big life changes like retirement or, needing care. It's a big challenge.
It really is. And to help us navigate this, we've got some fascinating sources. We're mostly looking at a specific proposal to modify an existing affordable housing agreement in La Quinta. And we're pairing that with a broader look at the challenges and the sort of limited ways you can actually change these long-term low-income covenants. These documents, they really show the complexity. But maybe before we dive right in, it might help to just quickly paint a picture for you, the listener. What exactly is an affordable housing agreement here? And maybe what's a silent second encumbrance?
Okay, so think of the affordable housing agreement like a contract tied directly to the property deed. It's basically a legal promise that the home stays affordable for a set number of years. And that's usually done by limiting the resale price or restricting who can actually buy it based on income. And this silent second encumbrance, that's typically a second mortgage, often from the city or a housing agency, maybe interest-free. It helps with the initial purchase. But it sits there silently until the home is sold. Then it sort of speaks up with specific repayment terms.
It's meant to help, but yeah, as we'll see, it can definitely have unintended consequences.
That makes a lot of sense, thank you. Okay, right, let's unpack this specific situation then. The watercolors at La Quinta community. So what we're seeing from these sources is that their affordable housing agreement, put in place back in 2006, tweaked a bit in 2007, is just, well, it's not really working anymore. It's reached a point where it's not really benefiting the city or the community as a whole, or crucially, the actual homeowners in the Watercolors Association. It's a problem with many facets, and a huge factor is simply time.
Yeah, watercolors are getting close to 20 years old. And you know what happens when homes and all that community infrastructure, we're talking sewers, water systems, the streets hit that age. They start needing major work, reaching the end of their useful life, basically. So you're looking at big, expensive repairs, even full retracements, not just cosmetic stuff. It's becoming urgent.
Exactly. And this is where the why becomes so critical for the homeowners themselves. The current agreement, the covenants tied to it, they essentially create this long-term financial disincentive for residents to actually invest in these necessary repairs. Most homeowners in the association, they just don't have the extra funds for that kind of expensive work. They're stuck.
Like a catch-22.
Precisely. Their homes need serious upkeep. But the agreement itself makes it incredible. It's this combination of factors, the proposal calls them silent killers, that really compound the harm. First, you cap the selling price. That immediately limits any potential equity growth for the homeowner, right?
Right.
Then you add strict income limits for potential buyers. That drastically shrinks the pool of people who can even qualify to buy.
Okay.
But here's a really crucial piece. The 20% maximum down payment rule. This means buyers can't put more money down even if they have it. That usually forces a larger loan principal, a higher loan-to-value ratio, which then often triggers mandatory private mortgage insurance PMI.
PMI, which is expensive.
Exactly. So buyers end up paying more each month in interest and insurance, making the affordable home less attractive financially in the long run. And all this creates really strong disincentives for both current owners and potential new buyers to sink their limited savings into those critical repairs the community needs.
Wow. That really lays bare how a policy meant to help can, inadvertently trap people. It stifles their ability to adapt. And this isn't just theory, right? The sources give a pretty stark example. Back in early 2007, the city actually spent something like $4.5 million just to prop up sales prices in watercolors during that whole housing crisis period. But even with that cash injection, some original buyers still ended up taking substantial losses. There's one specific case mentioned. Someone bought in 2007, sold in 2018, and lost over $40,000 on a $300,000 home. That's a huge hit, and it really shows that just throwing money at it once doesn't fix the underlying structural problem in the agreement itself. It's like that old saying, a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Absolutely. And then, to make matters worse, there have apparently been numerous allegations, even documentation, about issues with the original design and potential defects in the watercolors development itself.
Oh, great. Another layer.
Exactly. Another layer of potential financial burden. Plus, the documents suggest that the current homeowners association reserve funds. Well, they and any future funding efforts are unlikely to be sufficient over the next 20 years, unlikely to cover major capital projects, end-of-life restoration for community assets, damage from, say, natural disasters, earthquakes, climate events, or even just emergency fixes to critical infrastructure. It paints a pretty concerning picture for the community's future stability and raises that big question: who ultimately pays?
It's definitely clear watercolors is at a major crossroads, and the city has some really tough choices. So the proposal we're looking at outlines three distinct paths forward. Each one has pretty big implications for the community's, well, its fate and fortunes. Let's walk through them.
Okay, option number one. Some might call this the clean break. It's titled Release All Restrictions by 2030. This basically means releasing all the affordability covenant restrictions and forgiving all those silent second encumbrances by December 31st, 2030. A pretty direct move. That's right. It would certainly simplify things for homeowners, financially and in terms of selling. But it's important to note other restrictions from the La Quinta Housing Authority specific to watercolors, things related to age and residency, those would actually stay in place. What would change is who enforces them. That responsibility would shift from the city over to the homeowners association itself. So not all restrictions gone, just the affordability ones.
Got it. Okay, then there's a more gradual idea, option #2. Stage forgiveness at time of sale. This approach suggests that the affordability restrictions and the silent seconds would be forgiven, but only at the time of sale or ownership transfer, and only for homes sold after December 31st, 2030. So it's tied to an event, not a blanket date.
Yeah, and the nuance here is interesting. This option wouldn't automatically affect current homeowners who don't sell. They could, at their election, keep the covenants and the silent second loans until they decide to sell after that 2030 date. At that point, the seller could choose the forgiveness, or they could potentially transfer the existing covenants and silent seconds to a new buyer who meets the affordability requirements.
So it offers some choice.
It does. And again, just like option one, those other age and residency rules would stay, with enforcement shifting to the HOA starting January 1st, 2031. It gives current owners a bit more flexibility, maybe lets them benefit from the rules until they're ready to move on.
Right. And finally, the third path, option #3. No changes, status quo. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Make no changes at all to the current affordable housing agreements. The city keeps enforcing everything until the agreements eventually expire, which the sources say is sometime after 2046. This sounds maybe like the path of least resistance in the short term, but what are the potential long-term consequences?
Well, this option has a really significant implication, mainly for the city. It's a big one. If they do nothing, if the status quo holds, the city itself will need to provide capital-intensive infrastructure funding. That's the phrase used. Funding for all those essential repairs and restorations we talked about: sewers, water systems, street resurfacing for watercolors.
Why the city?
Because, as the sources clearly state, the homeowners themselves, both long-term residents and newer ones, are considered unlikely to be able to fund these massive expenses on their own. So by choosing inaction, the city could essentially be signing up for a huge future liability, basically footing the bill for infrastructure because the agreement makes it impossible for residents to maintain it.
Okay, so watercolors is a really powerful kind of boots-on-the-ground example here. But this problem isn't unique to them, is it? These challenges around modifying long-term covenants must come up elsewhere. How common is this, and what are the sort of universal hurdles when you're talking about removing, say, a 45-year low-income restriction on senior housing?
Oh, it's definitely a complex challenge, and yeah, surprisingly common. What's often fascinating is digging into the origin of these restrictions. These deed restrictions, they're usually recorded as part of a deal, right? To ensure affordability for a long time, often in exchange for things like public money, zoning breaks, maybe tax credits. So the very first step, the critical one for any community facing this, is figuring out who put the restriction in place. Was it the city, the county, maybe an old redevelopment agency, a housing authority, and why? Because that original purpose really dictates if and how that restriction could potentially be changed or removed down the line.
Okay, so once you know the who and the why, what are the actual routes for change, even if they are limited?
They do exist, but yeah, they often require a lot of effort. One possibility is just simple expiration. You have to check the document. Does the covenant have an actual end date where it just expires automatically?
It's just that simple.
Sometimes, but often not for these very long-term ones. Then there's mutual agreement.
The government agency that imposed it might agree to lift it, but that's usually only in pretty specific situations like clear hardship for the residents, or maybe if the original goals just aren't being met anymore or aren't relevant.
Okay.
A third route, though it's pretty rare and can be very expensive, is a legal challenge. A court could potentially lift a restriction if it's causing, say, undue hardship or demonstrably no longer serves a valid public interest, but that's a high legal bar to clear. And finally, there's legislative or policy change. This means advocating for reforms at the local or state level that might create pathways for certain types of deed-restricted housing to convert after a certain period. It often takes a multi-pronged strategy.
And it sounds like whichever path you explore, talking to the right people is absolutely key.
Oh, absolutely crucial. The sources really emphasize connecting with stakeholders like the local housing agencies, the city or county departments involved. And critically, getting advice from a real estate attorney who specializes in land use and affordable housing law. It's a niche area.
Right.
Community development consultants or housing policy experts can also be incredibly helpful in navigating this kind of complex maze. You really need that specialized knowledge. And, if completely canceling the covenant just isn't on the table, there might be other alternatives to explore. Things like, could the owner sublease the unit to someone who does meet the eligibility requirements while they retain ownership?
Right.
Or maybe request a specific hardship exception for just one requirement, like the income rules for resale for a particular resident in need.
Trying to find workarounds within the system.
Exactly. Or sometimes working with nonprofits or even government bodies to maybe transfer the restriction or find some way to compensate for its removal if it aligns with broader housing goals. It means thinking creatively. But it is important to remember, and the sources stress this, that removing a 45-year deed restriction early is generally uncommon and typically not encouraged by the agencies involved.
So it undermines the whole point. Right.
Precisely. It undermines those long-term affordability goals that were the reason for the public investment or incentive in the first place. However, circumstances do change dramatically over decades. We see that clearly in watercolors with the aging infrastructure, the shifting needs of residents. So while it's definitely difficult, it might be possible, but it usually takes really persistent legal and policy advocacy. It just shows how policies, even fixed ones, sometimes have to adapt to the messy reality of communities and human lives over time.
This has been incredibly insightful, really. Would you step back? What stands out most to you about how this kind of well-intentioned agreement, designed for a clear public good like affordable housing, how it can evolve over nearly 20 years and something causing such significant unintended problems? Affecting personal finances, yes, but also the basic infrastructure of a whole community. It really makes you think about the long-term consequences of policy design.
It absolutely does. I think these situations really throw into sharp relief that delicate and often very difficult balance. The balance between achieving a long-term public good, like keeping housing affordable and meeting the evolving practical needs and realities of individual homeowners and entire communities as they age. Things change. People's lives change. Buildings age. It's this dynamic tension, isn't it?
Right.
It suggests that maybe even our best policies need some kind of built-in flexibility, a way to be reevaluated over time.
Exactly. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's been fascinating exploring these affordable housing agreements and the really complex, very human challenge of what happens when they might need to change. And for you, our listener, here's something to mull over. As our communities and housing stock continue to age, how do we design housing policies that are truly adaptable? Policies that remain equitable for residents throughout their lives, ensuring that the promise of affordability doesn't somehow become a burden that traps the very people it was meant to help. It's a big question, worth pondering long after this deep dive ends.